took apart the protocol or looked at it, as soon as other people get a hold of that information, potentially those devices are out there for 10 and 15 years with other people having the means to do that.
Yeah, so kind of like what we've already said, that a lot of this, and you get to talk to people, and they'll say things like, well, but it's it's proprietary, nobody understands how it works, and it gives a very false sense of security, especially when you're talking to utilities who historically have not really worked in this type of space. They don't understand the types of threats that they're probably running up against. Probably, the people in this room who get something like that attached to their house, the first thing you want to do is pull that sucker off and figure out how it works, right? So it's a very different mindset in a new place for them. There's a real systemic lack of understanding and of really how competent and how aggressive some of these people are going to be, right?
Yeah, and on the other side of it, related to that too, it's utilities where they're used to this stuff now is sort of physical fraud. People that steal power. And so there's always the assumption, right, that that's what people want. Well, who's going to do all that trouble to get, to not pay $200 a month or something if you have, in the summer when your air conditioner is running, for electricity? Well, it's not really that. If you look back at, I think a lot of this stuff as being like the 1960s AT&T world, right? It's the guys, the phone freaks and everything that exploited those networks. They didn't care about getting free long distance, right? It was about exploring this network and figuring out what it does, And this stuff's really fascinating, and it does all kinds of nifty stuff. So people are going to take it apart. I think we're being stopped. Oh, sure. We'll go even faster after this. You good?
That's up. Yeah.
Just 1 year, guys. I'd like to not have to stand up here. We made it until 2 o'clock today, which is better than last year. How about next year we do it until Sunday? Several somebodies are eating a lot of food at Katie's and then not paying their bill. On the order of $100 plus type orders, where 7 people stand up and leave before paying the bill. Not once, not twice, several times. Very, very, very uncool. If you know who you are, no harm, no foul, go pay your bill. You were drunk, you didn't realize what you were doing, whatever. If you know who they are, step up, put some pressure on them, get them to go pay their bill. I don't know about you, but I happen to like this hotel, and this hotel so far likes us. The Alexis Park is a great hotel. I personally don't really want to go back there, because I don't like doing CPR on somebody in 110-degree weather. It's not a lot of fun. So please, stop being assholes, pay your bill, and if you walked out without paying your bill, go pay your bill. Thank you.
And if they don't come forward, walk over there and give somebody $10 at Katie's till it adds up to enough, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah,
sure. Yeah.
Get back on.
All right.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, yeah. So same point. Actually, which is, Dine and Dash is not hacking, just like meter theft is not hacking. That's just being a dick, right?
Yeah, it's called theft.
Yeah, that's theft. It's called being a dick. Same thing. Just like the point I was just making is that, what the utilities are thinking is going to happen here is that, people want to steal power because that's what they're used to dealing with now. And, what we think is that it's not going to be about that. It's going to be about getting access to everything inside that network and mapping it out. Just like, guys like Joy Bubbles and in the 60s in the phone freak days, they knew AT&T's network better than AT&T did. It's going to be the same thing. And those individuals may not necessarily be trying to do any harm, but they might stumble across something that doesn't do what they expected. See also Mother's Day, whatever that was, 98 or 99, right? So, the vendors also are still very new to all the disclosure things. And
yeah, you get into discussions with vendors on this, and they've never dealt with people like us before, right? And when they have, it's because usually they've actually brought them in themselves, so it's some sort of internal consulting engagement deal. It's very hard to talk to these people when you are not actually working for them. You try to get on the phone with somebody, try to, simple things like trying to ask questions or just clarify on things, and you get on the conference call and then you discover, oh, that's like legal counsel and some other VP, and the engineer that we were trying to talk to is nowhere to be found. And that's a very common thread through every interaction.
Yeah, and we would make a call and ask some little question to somebody in engineering, and they would give us an answer, and then the next time we'd call with another question, they'd say, I'm sorry, I can't. You're supposed to sign an NDA. We can't talk to you. And it's very much, that same kind of mentality that you saw like the Snowsoft days and the Sue Happy kind of stuff that came out of the software industry when we first started really finding a lot of bugs and trying to get them fixed, right? So that makes it pretty tough to talk about this stuff. And one of the things that concerns us a lot is that actually, as near as we can tell, everybody that we've talked to that's done the stuff that we've been up to has found all the same stuff.
And none of us can talk to each other.
Right. At all.
We're all under NDAs with separate companies, and we all find the same bugs. Yeah. And you may hear rumors about things over a beer, but nobody's actually talking to each other in this industry. Right. So.
And we're fairly confident that actually utilities are all paying people like us and giving those vendors the same bugs, right? And so that's not a very efficient way to do this. So we talked a little bit about the serial stuff under the hood. One of the big things that that we find as far as simplest ways to interact with these networks, and something that we think is the most interesting about this, is that under the hood somewhere, whether it's soldered to the board, whether it's under whether it's literally a board that snaps in, somewhere you're typically talking RS-232 serial.
And you talk about smart grid meters, right? Where if you start looking at spec sheets for different meters that utilities can buy, you'll find that each one supports a whole range of types of networking options. So it's all the stuff we listed earlier on that other page. It's either custom RF, and then you also have like cellular things, GPRS and whatnot. And the way, of course, that they're doing that is it's all modular, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense to build like 15 different meters just because you want to talk to a different network. So somewhere in there is some sort of an interface that sometimes it's password protected, but it's an interface that's serial. It's not like I can't tap that and just watch that occur. So it makes these particular devices more interesting and perhaps easier to interact with than some of the other hardware RF stuff that people look at. And there's been a lot of work from say Goodspeed or Josh Wright with some of the Zigbee stuff, and some of these other guys that are looking at embedded devices and still seeing the same problems there, where separate chips that are not integrated, and so you can tap buses and do things like that. Well, it's even easier oftentimes in these cases because it's actually a fully documented serial protocol and you just got to find the right pins, or it's an actual like a snap-in. So what we've been able to do in a couple different cases is literally just essentially talk to the device that's the radio for, say, a meter, as if we're the meter, right? And use that as essentially a network card, to talk to. So then we don't have to worry about encryption. We don't have to worry about any of the other things on the network. We're there. And they will actually refer to them when you start talking to the engineering guys. They'll call them modems, and that's because they really do. They act essentially like a modem. So, to that point, what we think is kind of the future of to speak to the theft of service side of things, is that rather than the way that people steal power now is that you pop a meter out and then jump the supply side across and put the meter back in, and then essentially no voltage goes to the meter. That's it. You've got free, or you take the buried cable in your backyard and jump that into your house, which we've heard stories about people doing. Is just dig till you hit it and then just tap that and then send that to your house. It's probably a good way to run grow lights, is what we hear. So instead of doing that now, right, what you're doing instead is what the utility sees with smart grid is the data itself, right? They're not walking to your house, they're not looking at your meter, they're not seeing if the dials are turning, they don't care about any of that, right? That's the whole point, is that they're going to pull this data remotely, and that's going to populate a database somewhere. So instead of messing with the actual power, you mess with the measurement of the power, right? So what we think is the most likely path that a lot of this stuff is going to go down is there are open source stacks in Linux for C1219 SCADA, which is the protocol that meters talk under the hood.
basically you have that and a serial port. You take the card out of your meter and you plug it into your Linux box, and then you just send whatever data you want to send. You know, that's it. Yeah, and it's more complicated than that. It's not literally just plug and play like that simple, but it is pretty straightforward. I mean, if you look at the traffic coming from there, it's essentially just a number that increments, and that's your interval read. So you can send that number any way you want. You know, so that's, yeah, for us, it's the quickest way to get involved in the network.
Right, and so sort of along those lines, I mean, there may be controls around any number of these things. In practice, I think, and we talk about this a little bit later as well, but in practice, it seems that many of those controls are not actually turned on. So one of the things that we've been working through is trying to get, more like configuration hardening or things along those lines, where it's like, well, so this thing is probably sending events that say, like, somebody just unhooked me, right? And that's bad. And that's a sign that somebody's messing with their meter, and you might want to send someone out to the house to make sure that they haven't done something like what we just described. But maybe that message is not actually being replayed up to the utility, or if it is, maybe the utility is not actually monitoring it, right? So all of those things, of course, have to happen for you to detect that event occurred.
Yeah, and that C1219 protocol has an entire stack of messages that indicate different things that happen to the meter. This voltage changed, and this thing changed, or this power, this line was unplugged, or whatever. But all of those events create more traffic on the network, which means buying more relays for that network, which means creating more traffic. You've got to buy more gear and rescope, how many collection points you have versus how many devices, and so they're kind of off by default, in our experience.
Yeah, and one of the probably the most interesting things that we found when we looked at this was when we started actually digging into how utilities are managing those networks at like the ground floor. So you think about how things have been done for a long time. You've got all these techs that are used to being able to have full control of a meter, and they understand how it works, and they're able to go out and actually like repair meters and and whatever they need to do. They're used to having a high amount of control of this device. Now we're into this new world where we've got highly advanced things that are a lot of management's being sucked back up into systems that people are interfacing with through like web apps and stuff back at corporate. Well, all these guys, they really felt like they needed this ability to be able to interface with these meters and be able to go directly to a meter or go to a neighborhood and be able to talk to these guys. So we started looking at how that works and what that was like. And really what we found was that it appeared that that demand from customers was not necessarily anticipated. So what happened was that providers were taking internal tools that they were using themselves and then sort of retrofitting them and then giving them to a customer.
So you've got a field tech who's a guy who's been a meter technician for 30 years, and he's used to being able to go in the field and do all this stuff. And now you go tell him he's got to log into a website and run some commands in his laptop and do all that. He's like, no, that's not what we do. So you see from these different vendors a little box, a field tech box that does disconnects and reconnects and moves service around and pulls information.
And by definition, those guys need to be able to talk to like any device that they want to, right? Because they never know what kind of scenario they're going to be hitting. So these little devices are actually fairly dangerous little guys, right? And how they work is interesting because it's all the same problems that you see with hardware and OSs and everything from before with like default accounts and that kind of stuff, right? It parallels exactly where you've got these magical God keys that can talk to your entire network. Maybe they can talk to like other customers' networks that are just happen to be using the same technology. Maybe there's a magical bit you can flip and you can talk to all of them all at once. We also found the reason why we think that a lot of these tools were developed in-house and then later turned around and given to customers was that we started actually pulling the software apart, and you find all these extra commands and all these functions that are not hooked up to anything. Like there's this pretty GUI up front, and then all these DLLs in the background that have a whole wide range of functionality, but not a lot of it wasn't hooked up. So we just kind of said, well, let's hook this back up. Let's see what this does, and then you find all kinds of interesting commands that nobody is aware of, right? So.
Yeah, and our concern is that basically same thing, fastest path to that network. Just like interacting with a network card, the fastest path to that network then is to identify what one of those boxes look like and get it off of the dash of the utility guy that has a truck parked in his front yard, and he doesn't think that thing's a big deal. He doesn't know that it has signing keys and all kinds of other scary stuff on it. It's the box that turns meters on.
We parallel it a lot with some of the things that have happened in the like the GSM or